Hello, everyone. I'm so delighted to be presenting this talk on protecting pollinators through gardening for the Retired Teachers of Ontario, District 23. The original talk that I gave, the sound quality wasn't the best, so I am re-recording this so you can actually hear what was said during the talk. There were some really good questions that came up during the talk, so I will try to mention them in this re-recording as I get to the areas, so we can have a little bit of that conversation as well. A little bit about myself is that my own journey as a lifelong gardener began a long time ago, but there's something new to learn every single day. I absolutely love plants, and my family jokes that I take more selfies with plants than I do with them. But it's just that I want to capture the beauty of the moment when I see a plant that I really, really like. And what better way to start our journey than by acknowledging that we are living and working on what has been for thousands of years the traditional territories of many First Nations. And I would like to acknowledge the current treaty holders and Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. And to say that this territory is the subject of the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, an agreement to peaceably share and care for the Great Lakes region. I'm grateful to have the opportunity to garden on this land, share its stories, and realize that as a steward, I can work towards healing past injustices to the land and the people. And it is with this that we start looking at the pollinators who also live with us on this land. So in this talk, I'm going to be touching three main points. One is that the pollinators, who they are, what their needs are, and what are steps to attracting and protecting them. And of course, growing native plants from seed. Most of what I'm going to be talking about can be found through the fantastic set of biodiversity booklets that the City of Toronto has published. They're an amazing resource because it talks about the biodiversity that exists in our local area. For the talk, I brought in a bunch of these so people had a chance to check them out and take one or two home with them. But all of these are available in digital PDF format where you can download from this site. In addition, Toronto has a pollinator protection strategy, which is fantastic. And the city has done a lot of work in trying to create a better environment for pollinators. So, what is pollination? And you'll see this little video of these are Toronto's official bees, the green striped sweat bees that are going through and pollinating this pale leaf coneflower, pale purple coneflower. And you can see it's essentially the transfer of pollen from the male to female parts that produces seed, fruit, and new plants. And you may think that this is actually one flower, but this coneflower, each of those tiny little specks is an individual flower that will produce a seed. So this conehead actually has hundreds of little flowers, and these bees will go around and gather the pollen and put it on their legs to take back to their nests. And one of the ways that I first learned about all of these was about pollinators was in 2018. I was part of the University of Toronto had a project called Bees in My Backyard, and this was in conjunction with the David Suzuki Foundation. And this is Professor Scott McIver. was he talked about trying to study what kind of wild bees were actually living in urban areas. And to track them, we set up these little nest boxes, which were essentially a piece of PVC with some foam and some paper tubes, and monitored it and reported every 2 weeks on which nests were filled and what was going there, and to get a better understanding of what was happening. Well, two of the great things that came out of that was the first thing was I learned so much about bees, and it was a thrill to see the different species that came and nested, because each species nested at a different time in a different size tube. And the second was I began using iNaturalist, which is a citizen science project where you log in your observations. It helps you actually identify what you see, but also logs it in so that others can benefit from the science that you gather. So it was great, and it's a great habit that I picked up, and I snap pictures everywhere, and I keep track of what's growing around me. And the second project I've been involved in, just as the first one was wrapping up, I heard about this other project and signed up to be a part of that. And this was through the University of Ottawa. And Lydia was looking at the effect of temperature on the way that bee larvae grew. So she had a different type of nest box. And this one was you had a little slide out that you could see the it was a little privacy screen for the bees where they could go and lay their eggs, and you could open it up and check to see, how the progress was and when it was laid and what species, and you'd send in those observations. And over here on the right hand side, I've got a little twig that shows what happens in nature. It's actually very similar to the process of what takes place in your garden, where bees will hollow out tubes and go in and have their, lay their eggs. And the nice thing about Lydia's project was she actually took the bees out, measured them, and to study and to find data. But then she brought them back to release them at our house. So the bees that had been laid in our garden actually came back and hatched there. And of course, it had to be during that 1 week that I was away from home. But my daughter was, and she called and she told me that while she was holding the little bee cocoons in her hand, one of them hatched, and there's a little baby bee on her hand, and it was the most amazing feeling. So to see them hatch it was just such a beautiful part of that project. And since then, I have been involved with one other project last year, but I don't have any data on that, and that is through York University. Anthony is looking at the relationship between the diversity of plant species and bee species. So I am going to include those results when I get them. But what about pollinators in Toronto? Well, if you take a look at this slide, 360 species of bees, 112 of butterflies and moths, and then there are wasps, there are flies, there are beetles, birds, bats, you name it. There are so many different things that pollinate, create that process, and produce the fruit. And I want to point out some of the superstars. And of course, you've met the green striped bee in the center of the video, of the screen. But this bee's not the only one. And from all the pollen on her legs, you can tell it's a female that is taking that pollen to make the little baby nest for her baby bees, the larvae. But there's also on the left of the screen is this clear wing hawk moth, which is actually a moth that flies during the day, and the wings are clear, and it is just fabulous, adorable. And then there are the lady beetles, there are plant bugs. I have over here at the bottom, I have the sour cherry tree, and there are ants crawling all over it, and I bet you most of that harvest comes from those ants, because as they go, they will eat the pollen because it's got fat, it's got full of nutritious, and they carry it around with them. And then there are various types of hoverflies and regular flies and more bees, and of course the butterflies. So there's a lot of folks involved in making those the pollination happen in your garden. And so we're going to look at a couple of different ways where that happens. So at this point in the conversation, there was a question about the role of honeybees. And the answer I gave was that honeybees are actually a livestock. It's like talking about, can we protect wild bird populations by raising chicken? And it's honeybees are actually, they're medicated. They have antibiotics. There are so many chemicals involved, and they actually carry parasites. And so when they go and interact with wild bee populations, they are one of the reasons that there is such a decline in wild bee populations. And also honeybees are generalists, so they will go to any flower and outcompete local bee populations. So they get a lot of visibility because there's a lot of profit to be made, and sell the honey. But we have to be clear about who is suffering and who is getting harmed with biodiversity loss and loss of habitat. Certainly not the honeybees. And another question I got was about whether I've ever been stung by a native bee, because you can tell I really get up in their face. So native bees, they do have, the females have the ovipositor, which is to lay eggs, which acts as a sting as well. But the stinging behavior is not common in these solitary bees because they don't have that hive mentality. They won't go and attack. They've got a very short lifespan. They're only interested in finding a mate, laying eggs, and starting the next generation. So they're not at all aggressive. And but you have to be distinct between, and be able to tell between what is a wasp and what is a bee. So native bees are quite harmless, and wasps, if you start understanding their behavior, it will demystify some of that for you. So one of the plants that I want to talk about now is the cutleaf coneflower, which is native to our area, and this is in my garden. And you can see that there's a monarch butterfly on one of the blooms and sucking the nectar out from the many flowers. As I said, each coneflower has actually hundreds of little flowers, and the butterfly will spend the time and suck the nectar from each of them. It no longer has mouth parts to chew, but it's only got that straw. And it's going to be looking for the host plant to lay its eggs on during its short lifespan. And somebody asked me, well, I thought butterflies have a long lifespan because they go, like monarchs, travel all the way to Mexico. And the interesting fact is, it's not the same butterfly who makes the entire journey, but they will stop, reproduce, and the next generation will carry on the trip. But somehow it is built into their DNA that they remember where they hatched and they will come back there year after year. So this is just one part of their very long journey. So let's take a look at what happens on this cutleaf coneflower. So I'm going to use this drawing of this cutleaf coneflower as a basis of exploring the different relationships it has. Well, the first thing you'll notice is that there's always this silvery checker spot butterfly that's hanging around the flower. And as you can guess, it's there because it loves the nectar. So it's going to feast on the nectar from the flower. And there's also going to be a striped green sweat bee collecting pollen from the flowers to take for its to its nest, and lay its eggs and prepare the little bundle, baby bundle, for those babies growing up. But interestingly, that nest may actually be on the plant itself, because the hollowed out stems from the previous years are going to be the perfect spot for that sweat bee to have a nest. There are also going to be goldfinches eating the seeds from the coneflower in the fall. And if you were wondering, are they using it in a different way as well? Oh, yes. Nesting material is perfect. All those little dried branches and stems and twigs. And so going back at the butterfly, you may be interested to know that it had a little bit of an ulterior motive, because it will also lay its eggs on on the leaves of this flower, because when those eggs turn into caterpillars, this is exactly the food that they will need. As I said, caterpillars are very picky about what they eat. So these ones will eat from the coneflower family. And so they have the food source right there. And in a short while, those caterpillars will turn into chrysalis and resume the and this will complete the life cycle of the butterfly. But you may be thinking, wait a minute, all those hundreds of eggs that were laid by just one butterfly, is that going to decimate the plant? If all of them turn into caterpillars and they start munching away, surely the plant is going to be destroyed. So as it turns out, that 97% of those caterpillars will actually be baby bird food. During their first few weeks of life, baby birds can only eat soft food. So the parents have to find and bring back to them hundreds and thousands of caterpillars, so these babies grow. So at this point, you may be thinking to yourself that, oh, if these bees need hollow stems and places like this to nest, wouldn't it be an excellent idea to have these bee motels that are commercially available and hang them up in your garden? And the problem with that is there is a whole dark side to the bee world, and I'll tell you a little bit about it shortly. But bees have their own parasites and insects that want to eat them. So having them exposed like this it may make you feel good about yourself, but it's actually putting the lives of those bees in danger. And there's a very low survival rate because of all the bad things that can happen to the bees. So let's take a look at the darker side of the bee world. So there are lots of other insects that take advantage of the hard work of these solitary bees who make these perfect nests and lay the eggs. And they don't gather pollen themselves, but they will actually hunt these bee nests and go and lay their eggs in there or parasitize them. And so we start with the nomad bees on the upper left, and the reason they're nomads is because they go from nest to nest. They don't have a nest of their own. And they will find bees and follow them. There are those who are wasps who will lay their eggs, so other insects in the bees, and have the larvae of the bees act as the food source. Or in the case of this sharp-tailed, the cuckoo bee, it actually mimics a leafcutter bee, so it looks like one, but it will go and lay its eggs in their nests. Then there are those like the greater bee fly, which actually resembles a harmless bumblebee, and it's all fuzzy and cute, and it just hangs around, and everybody's like, oh, you're just a bumblebee hanging around. But the minute the bee looks away, it will go and lay its eggs inside the larvae of the other bees. So there's a lot of this going on. And initially, when I saw this, I was completely shocked. And I thought to myself, should I be doing something about these other bees? And one of the researchers that I was talking to said, no, actually, this is a really good sign, because these are all high up. These are all like the high level at top of the food chain. So the fact that you have these populations in your garden means the bee population is healthy enough to be able to support them. So it's actually a good sign. So I've started to look at them a little differently, and I'm not as bothered anymore, knowing that they are part of the ecosystem that keeps everything healthy and working. So if you're not supposed to buy those commercial bee motels, then what can you do to host bees in your garden? And for this, I turned to my own garden. Back in 2006, when we moved here, it looked like every other garden on the street. I would say maybe 20 varieties of mostly non-native plants, and lots of grass, one lonely silver maple, and a bunch of annuals. And so 18 years later, I have 228 varieties, 70% of which are native, and it is thriving and full of life, and I have dug up that lawn. And one of the things that I do is, you can see it, this picture over here, is I've created these pathways where you walk through the garden designated areas, but I also have not taken down any of the vegetation that dies back in the fall. So you know those things called cleanups? I don't believe in them. And here's a bigger picture of my garden, and you can see the pathways. So it turns out a huge number of bee species nest in the ground. And in order to not disturb their nest, I have a no-walk policy on the garden beds. So the garden beds are not touched, the stems are not cut back, the vegetation is not removed, and if anything, if I see leaves, I will pile it back onto the garden beds. Because there's a funny thing about leaves, is that they decompose and turn back into soil. And they amend the soil, and they give it nutrition, the nutrients it needs. So it's a fabulous thing. Why would you want to get rid of it? And also these branches, the stems of the plants that are left over winter, they actually act as barriers, and they keep the leaves in place as opposed to have them blowing away. So it's like a complete win-win. And these are filled with bees and life and creatures, and why would I want to give them to anybody else? These are going to be the beautiful things that emerge in my garden in the spring. And this kind of method is actually called messy gardening method. And it's about leaving areas that are undisturbed for insects. And here are some examples. So I use a lot of wood as edging for the garden beds. And you can see in this top left picture of how the wood starts decomposing. Initially, the beetles will come in and make a hole. Then once the hole's there, the bees will find it and they will lay their eggs. And slowly it decomposes and goes back into being nothing but great soil. Or under my window, and here you see the watchful eye of our dog, who's a little cute little dog that's always at the window checking out what I'm doing. We have a pile of branches that fall down from our silver maple, and we put them over there, and that becomes a sanctuary for insects. They can overwinter, they can have nests, and another thing I noticed, this middle picture, is I was walking by, and you can see there's probably a bee that made a nest in that stem. It's completely dug it out, and is probably in there and laying eggs. And you can see in winter as well how the stems that are standing not only are great for keeping the leaves, great decoration, but they're also a food source for the birds. So the birds will come and eat those seeds that you leave in the winter as a natural bird feeder. And oh yeah, this is a cute little video of ground nesting bee. This is a leaf cutter bee, and you can see it's carrying the leaf under, and it's going under these planks in the garden. So it's found a hole and it's nesting there. And I don't know how many of you have heard of leafcutter bees, but they are absolutely phenomenal. This is a video of what a leafcutter bee looks like, and it's adorable. And you can see it's actually one of my favorite videos that I've taken. It's on the butterfly weed. It's a type of milkweed. And the stance is the leaf cutter is actually taking the pollen that it sticks to its legs and rubbing it onto the abdomen so it can store it and take it back to its nest. It's just adorable. And what leafcutter bees do is live up to their name. They cut holes in leaves. And I've heard so many people that come to me and say, "Oh, it's so horrible. I've got these leaves and they have holes." And I say, "Oh, you are so lucky. Have you seen the leafcutter bees?" And they don't understand why I would think they're lucky, because somehow they think that their leaves are damaged. But it's nothing brings me joy than seeing these holes in these leaves, because I know what's happening is that leafcutter bee, the female, is cutting a perfect circle, putting it under itself and flying it to its nest so it can make these little bee blankets to hold its babies. So for you, I have a video that shows what I did for 4 hours of my life a couple years ago, where I did a stakeout in front of my redbud tree and waited. I knew there were leafcutter bees doing something, and I just had to get some videos. And you can see this in slow motion, what happens. And it's just phenomenal. Ooh, flying away. And then when I put it at regular speed, now you understand why it was such a challenge to actually find the bees and video. It was just so fast. And then I had another one, was almost finished. It's pretty impressive. It beats its wings and flies off with that leaf. And the third video is I heard something, and out of the corner of my eye, I saw this little lady. And it is by far the most amazing view of the bee flying off with the leaf. Pretty remarkable. And this is actually from that book, The Bees of Toronto. This is what the leafcutter bee does. It takes it back to its to the hollowed out stem and wraps up its babies and puts some food for them so they will eat the food and grow and hatch into bees the following year. So the mother will never see its babies, but it provides everything. And a very interesting, um, the way that the bee lays the eggs is the boys are at the entrance to the hole and the girls are way at the back. So if parasites attack, guess who's going to take the fall? It's the boys that go. It's just the bee that it values the girls more than the boys. But there are other bees that do this kind of solitary nesting. Another one is the resin bee. This one is actually a bellflower resin bee, so specialist in bellflowers. And it makes its nest in areas that are prone to flooding. So it secretes this resin-like structure to act as a wall between each of the little bee nests, the larvae. And the third one I want to say is the mason bee, which actually builds the walls of each of the little chambers with mud. And it lays the egg and in there, and they will grow up that way. You can find out about these and all the other bees in the Bees of Toronto book, either the printed one or the digital one, but it is fascinating. And once you start seeing these bees, and especially the official Green Bee of Toronto, you can never turn away. They are everywhere and they are absolutely stunning. And so, coming back to the topic of creating habitat for creatures, I have to mention this back in 2021 on April 7, I saw my first butterfly of that year, and it was a morning cloak butterfly. And I couldn't help wonder, where did this butterfly come from? Did it migrate? Did it hatch? Was it here all along? And as it turns out, the chrysalis of this butterfly overwinters in the leaves on the ground. So if you throw away those leaves, you are throwing away an entire generation of butterflies. And in fact, I was cleaning out my raised vegetable beds, and I came across this thing you can see it on the side post. It's like dangling down. And I thought, what could that be? I've got to find out. So I took it back in and took some pictures and found out that, and I actually did a little bit of reconstructive surgery. It's like used masking tape and a little piece of twine and held it upright. It turns out that it is the chrysalis of the black swallowtail. And it makes so much sense because I had a lot of, dill last year. And there were caterpillars and they would disappear. And I didn't know where they were. And one of them, this is the chrysalis. And I put it in my front patio, which has got an open window and is cold. So one of these days it will hatch and fly out. So again, these insects overwinter in the what we consider as debris. And one of the other things we spoke about was food for pollinators. Where do they get? So, contrary to popular belief, is while a lot of them do pollination, they don't actually get all their food from pollen. And this is an interesting story about one such case that I saw. And I was raising these swamp milkweed seedlings. I'd grown them from seed, and I noticed that they had this nasty oleander aphid infestation. Now, I haven't used a single pesticide in my garden for 18 years, and I'm not about to start, so it just kills indiscriminately, kills the good and the bad and the ugly and the pretty, and it's like, why would you want to do that? So I said, let me try an experiment and see what happens. Will nature take care of these? And a couple days later, I noticed that there was this little slender white egg attached to the leaf just above the infestation. And so I checked on iNaturalist, and I found out that it is the egg of a lacewing. So interestingly, the lacewing had noticed this delicious supply of oleander aphids and said, this is the perfect spot for me to lay an egg, because when my larvae hatches, it is going to have a food source of aphids and it's going to be able to eat them. So I thought, okay, that's a good start. And then I noticed that there's also a ladybug that showed up and started eating these. And it was just voracious appetite and eating and eating. And I thought, okay, this is looking good. But then one day I noticed this other thing showed up, and it was eating them like never before. I mean, by now, the oleander aphid infestation, you can see each picture, it's getting less and less because there's more people coming to the buffet of deliciousness. And I thought, what is that thing? So I went to iNaturalist and I looked up, and it was very appropriately, it's actually the same picture that I had and that I put in there, and it said it's the long-tailed aphid eater. As if ever there was a name that is appropriate, this would be it. And I thought, okay, but what does it look like in adult form? And look at that. It is a hoverfly. So a hoverfly had seen that delicious food and said, that's exactly what my future child will need, and had laid an egg, and that aphid eater was clearing up that infestation of aphids. So that was like a really great story on attracting beneficial insects. And they're not just one or two, but if you can attract the right sort of insects to your garden and creatures, because there's a bird in here and a dragonfly, it's they will do the heavy lifting for you. For example, this robber fly on the top left actually eats the parasites of the bees. And this gold digger on the lower left actually eats grasshoppers. So wasps are a phenomenal source of cleanup. They're like the cleaning crew of nature, and they take care of a lot of things. And one year I was so fortunate because there are not huge populations of this left. The one in the middle, lower middle one, I can't even pronounce the name, but this with it's like a 2-inch abdomen. Initially I thought it was maybe a crane fly, and then I took a picture, and it's a very slow moving, shy wasp. And what it does is somehow it finds the grubs in the ground, and it puts that abdomen almost up to 2 inches into the ground and lays an egg in that grub. And that's how it continues. The baby will eat the grub and grow up. And if you ever have a grub problem, these are the ones you want on your side. Of course, we saw what hoverflies do. They are just phenomenal. And dragonflies eat a lot of insects as well. But if you can attract one creature to your garden, it's got to be a bird. Because birds will eat their weight in insects every single day. Every single day. So, yes, the babies need the caterpillars um, when they are young, but once they grow up, it is just amazing what they will do for your garden. And so, I've been talking about iNaturalist quite a bit, and I thought I'd pull in some stats because that's pretty impressive, eh? It's obviously I don't identify much, and I've only do observations of the the land I live on, just the area around my house, just this property, because I want to get a deeper knowledge. And 267 species of insects share it with me. It is absolutely phenomenal. And that's what it looks like. It is just spectacular to think. Mind you, these are all not the same. There's some of these are repeat screenshots, but I just kind of wanted to show you what 267 species looks like. So there are some repeats. But if I include myself in iNaturalist, that goes up to 268. And it's a little reminder of where I am in this grand scheme of things. It's like, hey, I am just one of many who calls this land home. So I need to be a little neighborly and a little bit kind to those who live with me on it. And I know that in our live session, there was a discussion about whether a plant is weed or not, or what do I do with it? And my response to that comment was that every plant is native somewhere. Instead of classifying things as weeds, because weed is a very man-made, human-made category of if it's not useful to us, we don't really care about it. And for example, milkweed, which is critical to the survival of the monarch butterfly. Just because we can't eat it doesn't mean the butterfly has to go extinct. So instead of the binary of good plant, weed, I'd like to think of it as native and invasive. In our case, our cutleaf coneflower has evolved with this fantastic web of life around it that keeps checks and balances on it. So it is native to our area. However, if that plant goes to some place where it is not native, like I think this is Poland, it decimates the environment because it creates these food deserts where there are no insects that are able to eat it. It does not provide nesting material. There is nothing to stop its growth. And it takes over entire areas, and it is absolute devastation. And same thing in Japan. There's actually, they have a ban import, like you cannot grow it. They are fighting so hard to get rid of it because it doesn't have those things that limit its growth, and it's not, the things that feed off of it. It's absolutely useless. So we should aim for have growing plants that are native to our area wherever we live in the world, if we want to have a positive impact on the ecosystem. And I'll show you a little bit video of where I live, and this is actually, you can see this, I'm right under my neighbor's walnut tree with giant yellow hyssop and lots of plants and labeled, and this is dense blazing star, cardinal flower, and pale purple coneflower, and evening primrose. And these are some of the plants that I grow as part of the community growing project. Some veggies, some plants. So that's really nice. But maybe the most impressive video is I have to show you this video of the pale purple coneflower that I've grown from seed. It's about 3 years old now, and it was blooming fabulously this year. And considering that I don't do any cleanup in the garden, I have a lot of time to take videos. So that's what I did, and I was just looking at all the pollinators that were visiting it and enjoying it, including this monarch. And that's kind of what you see is if you have plants that support different wildlife and biodiversity, it brings a lot of joy and a lot of life with it. So it's quite fun. And one of the plants that people are so worried about is goldenrod, and I have to say it is absolutely one of my favorites. These tiny little bees thrive on it, and it provides late season pollen where a lot of stuff has stopped growing in the garden. And there is a misnomer about it being causing allergies because the pollen is actually too heavy to be carried by wind. So ragweed is the culprit there that gives goldenrod a bad name. But if there's one thing you want to add to your garden, let it be goldenrod. You won't regret it. So we've talked about the benefits and how to create that environment, but the one missing piece is about adding native plants. So for you, today I brought a whole bunch of different native seeds that you could start right away. The one thing I'd like to mention is that plants that are native to Canada, because we have this thing called winter, the seeds have a way of protecting themselves. They've developed a dormancy mechanism in that they will continue to stay asleep until they go through until there's ideal conditions. And for many of them, that means they go through a cold period and then they wake up. So there are different ways that seeds remain dormant. Either it's through a chemical reaction, so there are seeds that have to either go through fire or go through the digestive system of an animal to get that outer shell chemically altered. It could be light, a changing in light, or it could be a change in temperature. In the case of stratification, there is a temperature difference that breaks dormancy. The majority of the seeds need 4 to 8 weeks of cold, moist conditions to germinate. And what I do, I lead a group of volunteers, and what we do is, because we want to do the easy way, we use a process called winter sowing, where we put our pots, we plant the seeds, put them out, exposed to the elements, and but covered by a piece of chicken wire or mesh from those little digging squirrel hands. And we let nature do that cold stratification for us. But it's also a process that you can do in the fridge. Never freezer, only fridge. And you start by adding seeds to a damp medium. In this case, it's vermiculite. Put it for 4 to 8 weeks in a fridge, and your seeds will germinate and you grow. And because I was wondering if I could possibly separate the cold and the moist, a couple of years ago I did an experiment, and I separated the process into two steps. By first, I did a cold dry stratification, which was essentially a fancy way of saying keep the seeds in the fridge for 5 weeks. And once they had that cold period, then I soaked them for 12 hours and I kept them in a moist condition and they germinated. So this is actually the system to use for the seeds that I have given you. Um, those seeds have been kept in the fridge. When you get them, you will either continue to keep them in the fridge or start them. And what you do is you put the seeds, if there are large seeds like this, you will soak it overnight in water. If there are tiny seeds, you can skip that soaking period. You can just plant them directly in soil. And what you'll see is they absorb enough water to start growing that way. One other step I like to do is I actually, after I soak them, I like to put them on a little damp paper towel and put it in a little Ziploc bag and make sure those seeds are germinating. And the reason I do that is because a lot of times the soil dries out and gets wet and dries out. It's not very consistent. If you have a damp paper towel in bright location, but not direct sunlight, just like good lighting, it gives them a stable condition to germinate. And once you see them start putting out the roots and the leaves, you're like, buddy, you are good to go. And so you can plant them in soil and watch them grow. And of course, one of the easiest ways is to pot them all up together and then divide them. And there are various videos and techniques. I've got some on my blog about the different ways of dividing. But man, I go through a lot of seedlings, like this whole division and everything. So I'd also like to show you my YouTube channel, which has, oh, look at that, 37 videos already. The ones that I think most relate to our talk today was I have these 3 with the black color. Those are the ones I made for the North American Native Plant Society, which is a fantastic organization. I think everybody should be a member of. They have taught me so much about native plants. I am so proud to be a member. And I enter the garden video contest each year. And I have a hat trick because I've won 3. Not in a row, but I've won 3. And there's a bunch of other videos that you can also watch that are about, there's a recent talk that I gave with my friend Nancy about winter sowing. But a bunch of different things. It's all gardening and plant related that you can take a look at. And of course, don't forget, the City of Toronto has excellent resources for you to take a look at. So I think it's worth a visit to learn about what the different pollinators are in Toronto and how we can protect them. So thank you very, very much for this opportunity to speak. I know that in person our conversation wandered and meandered and we had great bits of chit chat and things, but I think this will be a better format for you to remember this talk, and I look forward to having our paths cross again. Thank you very much, my friends.